Welcome to another episode of the Triple J Sports Podcast with your host, Phil Rasmussen. It's a pleasure to introduce today's guest, Jesse Pruitt. Jesse is a veteran assistant basketball coach at the collegiate level, starting his career back in 2006, shortly after graduating from UC Davis, where we were teammates and friends. Jesse was a LA product, had a great high school career before joining UC Davis. Shortly after finishing his career, he started his coaching career at Cal Poly Pomona. And he was there from 2006 to 2008, huge factor in setting the culture and attracting the players from a recruiting perspective that laid the foundation for the back-to-back national championship appearances, including winning the national championship at the Division II level in 2010. Jesse left Pomona at the end of 2008 and started his 8-year run at Santa Clara University in the West Coast Conference, and built a tremendous reputation as a recruiter and skill development guy, and really understanding how to build the kind of relationships with players to make a difference in their lives. Then he went on to an 8-year stint at Stanford University, where he produced over 40 academic all Pac-12 performers, multiple Pac-12 Academic Player of the Years, and multiple Pac-12 players on the academic and basketball teams, as well as numerous Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. Recruiting and relationship and skill development have been a huge part of Jesse's background. Jesse's got a wealth of knowledge and a very strong foundation of leadership and development that is incredibly fun to sit and listen to and go back and forth with, as well as some really cool experiences. Now, as he starts his journey at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, probably one of the most beautiful places there is to work and play, quite honestly. He will be back out on the road. As a matter of fact, I was fortunate enough to have Jesse in town to sit down in the studio with me while he's here recruiting. Really can't thank Jesse enough for taking the time to share his insights. So I really hope you all enjoy the episode. Lots of cool stuff, lots of very compelling insights, and I hope you all enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Triple J Sports Podcast, and our guest today, Coach Jesse Pruitt. Jesse, thanks for making a swing by, my man.
Bill, thanks for having me, man. Good seeing you.
Thrilled to have you, dude. So I know you're in town to do some recruiting and for your new school here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Congrats on the new position, man.
I appreciate it, man. It's super exciting. It's always nice when there's events in California where we don't got to get on a plane and travel across the country. Absolutely, yeah. Recruiting is a whole different world to live in, man, and I know there'll be plenty of games today, but is that kind of the first thing as you took the job? Was that like one of the instant, like, all right, what are we doing for recruiting? Yeah, because when you take a job, first thing is, all right, what's the roster look like? And the era that we live in with the transfer portal, you got half your team staying, half the team leaving. You got to learn about the university, who are the type of kids that you can recruit there, and then move forward and try to build a roster as best you can, especially in this first year.
And start from scratch. How many guys did you guys have on your roster that were potential returners, and how many were had already gone to the portal? What did it look like when you guys stepped in?
Yeah, so our head coach got there, took the job probably about a month before I officially came on board. So I think he dealt with it where he had, I think, 5 kids, scholarship players that were dialed in, locked in, wanted to stay at SLO, and then probably 3 or 4 that were on the fence. And he told them, and I love this about him. I mean, talk about leadership. He said, I took this job at SLO for the same reasons that you decided to be a student here. And as long as you want to be a student here and a student athlete, I'm going to respect it, and you have a place on this team. So he didn't come in there trying to run guys off or kick guys off, and I thought that was pretty powerful. And he gave those guys, a long window to make that decision, because everybody has to figure out what's best for them and what have you. So we end up keeping 6 players, some guys who played more than others, but guys are super excited, and then we brought in 7 new guys.
And such a wow. And are they freshmen, portal transfers?
Yeah,
probably a mix, I would assume.
So my head coach, Mike DeGeorge, he came from Colorado Mesa, so a Division II head coach. So he's been part of rebuilds at the NAIA level, D3, D2, and so we brought in kids that he was familiar with. So we brought in 4 players from his program at Mesa. We brought in a kid from West Texas who actually knocked them out of the Division II national tournament, and then we brought 3 international players. So we went international and the D2 route to kind of put our roster together for this first year.
That sounds like a fit to establish a culture very quickly, right? He's immediately grabbing kids that fit what I'm sure is the culture that he's looking to build and you guys want to put together. Those are fixed variables now, and now managing the talent. I think that's a great strategy, especially at a school like that. I know when we were talking the other day and talking about SLO, the first thing that came to mind was from time at Davis playing, and how that's probably one of my favorite schools to go visit and play, not because I enjoyed playing SLO specifically, but because staying at the Cliffs was by far the best road trip that we had.
Davis had a nice budget. Stayed at the Cliffs.
I don't know what the deal was, because we didn't say it. It was like the one place where we stayed at a super high-end hotel, and it felt like a vacay. And definitely was, I think, one of the best like locations to stay. So, are you guys getting settled? The family getting settled? In. I mean, it wasn't a big move from where you were at Stanford.
Well, I'm not shocked that you said it was one of your favorite visits, because the last month I've had like 10 different friends send me screenshots of this thing that was circulating. But San Luis Obispo is like the 4th best college town in America. It's like Ann Arbor, Boulder, one other, and San Luis Obispo.
Really?
So it's everything. It's 22,000 students. Everything is surrounded by the university. We've got a farmers market every Thursday night that like shuts down the entire city. So it's unbelievable.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. I would have put Santa Barbara and some other schools, like I would assume.
Sure,
there, but yeah, I mean, SLO is such a beautiful place.
No, it's amazing. And my family's, they've visited 3 or 4 times now, because they're still wrapping things up in Palo Alto. They'll be coming down later this month, so the family's super excited about this new adventure. That's
awesome, man. Well, that perfect segue to kind of go in. So you've been in the coaching game now for almost 2 decades. And
it's crazy.
You've been, I would say, a rare, product in terms of longevity at institutions, in especially in an environment where the coaching business can be a carousel that takes you from one location to another. I know that's why I exited the business. So your time, we obviously linked up at Davis, and you got out and started your career at Cal Poly Pomona, a D2 school similar to where I coached at Chico State. Had a lot of success. Did you guys win a title there? Were you there for the national championship?
So I helped recruit a couple players that started on the national championship team. So I was there for 2 years. I leave to go to Santa Clara to be the video coordinator, and then that season they go to the national championship, lose in overtime, go back the next year, and they won the national championship.
That's right. So you brought the guys in much like I inherited from Gus Arginal and Klink's work at Chico when I went over. You were laying the foundation for that. That's great. So then you went on to Santa Clara, and you were there for 8 years with Coach Keating, and then another 8 years at Stanford before now moving over here to SLO. And just saying 8 years as an assistant coach in any college program is very much a testament to your performance, your character, and everything, as well as being, I think, probably, I'm sure in some ways, look at yourself as lucky because of the things that can go on, and obviously now you're in the change, but kind of going back on your journey and what started, what made you get into coaching to begin with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I was a freshman in college, redshirted my first year at UC Davis, and it's about the springtime, probably like around April. And we go to the office, and Greg Klink, who we know very well, and Kevin Nosik are in the office, and they said, "Hey, does anybody want to work Stanford basketball camp?" And I was like, No, I kind of, first, freshman year, you kind of want to go home.
I got lots of stuff to do as a
I got lots of
freshman,
stuff to do,
man.
right? So they said, well, hey, after camp, you can play with Josh Childress and Chris Hernandez and Casey Jacobson and the players. And I was like, sold. I mean, those are all Southern California guys, my age, my era. And I was like, I get to play against the best of the best. I'm all in. So that was like the summer of 2002. So I go and I work Stanford basketball camp. And then I worked that camp for 8 straight years. So I think I worked it under Mike Montgomery. I worked it under Trent Johnson. I worked it under Johnny Dawkins' first summer. And then the crazy part is then I ran that camp for 8 years. So the fact that was my start and then get to run it for 8 years was pretty cool. But I worked Stanford camp, and then I started branching out. I worked UCLA camp. Went across the country with our dear friend Robert Eson, worked the Maryland basketball camp.
Eson.
And one of the coolest camp experiences was I worked all those Stanford years. I decided to work Tara Vanderveer's camp, women's coach.
Yeah.
Because I was there. There was a week in between. I was like, if I'm already here on the farm, why not work her camp? So I worked her camp, and I had never worked a girls' camp before. And usually with the boys' camps at the end of the last day of camp, every kid gets a camp basketball. You sign them. They go on their way. Tara gave every camper a basketball when they checked in. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a disaster. I was like, these kids are going to be playing kickball. They're going to be bouncing when she blows her whistle. I was like, how is this going to work? And she blew her whistle for the first time, and every kid stopped. Over 200 kids in the gym held the basketball. My mind was blown. I was like, I don't know if this is the difference between boys and girls or this is just Tara Vanderveer, but whatever it is, they listened. And they had their basketball with their ball for the entire camp. So there was no sitting around, waiting between drills to actually get a rep. You had a ball in your hand the whole time. And I just thought that was brilliant.
Totally. As soon as you said it, I was like, yeah, I can imagine that the objective is to give them a ball and have that be their but yeah, getting kids to. Because
on the boys' side, that would have never worked.
Oh.
I mean, you would have just spent the first 15 minutes, getting the ball, telling kids to stop, separating kids.
The squabbles and the fights and the dribbling and then the kid that because that you've been told not to dribble now wants to be the one that does it to make everyone laugh. Yeah, I think there's probably boys. I've been, my oldest daughter's soon to be 13, and I've got a youngest that's 7, and my son. So I coach boys and girls. Done the camps like you, and I do think there's definitely some differences there in terms of it. But I think that's like one of the cool things when you work camps and you see coaches that have done it a lot, and you really see how they control the kids. It's a cool way. I know I learned a lot watching Klink and Chris Cobb at the camps as far as different things they would do to like create a control, little levers and whatnot. But that's really cool. I think jumping into that and doing the women's and the or the girls in the boys camps. When you did the UCLA's, who was the coach at UCLA when you were working those camps?
Yeah, so that would have been good question. I think it was Coach Howland. I think it was early in Coach Howland's tenure. I think it was early in his tenure that those camps, and they were phenomenal. I mean, a beautiful campus, ton of kids. And I got to experience some of those legendary UCLA runs that everybody talks about because those runs happen in the men's gym, which is like the auxiliary gym, and we would use that for camp. So when we were done with our morning session at camp, we would usher out to go to lunch, and then the pros would come in and start playing. And I got to see Kevin Garnett come in once. He came in. It was Kevin Garnett. It was Paul Pierce, and they were the main guys, and there was nobody in there that could guard Garnett. So Ronnie Turioff walks in with jeans on just to be a spectator. And Garnett sees Turioff, and he says, hey, man, let's go. I need you to play. Turioff's like, nah, man, I'm good. And now the legend of Garnett and his mouth, everybody gets to see it in front of all these kids. He dog cusses Turioff to tell him, put on some shorts, let's go. And Turioff's like, fine. He reluctantly comes out and plays. And they're playing hard. And Garnett is so laser focused. He probably had no idea there were people around him. He was just so focused, and the stuff that he was saying come out of his mouth. I mean,
run for cover.
But it was ultra competitive, and to see those guys up close was really neat.
So was it what collectively, how long were they playing? And so Garnett and Pierce are there. Were there some other guys there that were pretty regular at that time? Because I'm trying to think about that window. What like year range?
Yeah, so there wasn't as many superstars as we see on the videos, which again that does happen.
Yeah.
But this is kind of an impromptu. Garnett and Pierce were there, and then Turioff. And I think there are a few other Laker guys that were there as well. And then the UCLA current players jumped in the run as well.
Jumped in. Yeah, I think those pickup games, from just a guy I remember playing in them, and like they kind of exemplify to me everything that is great about basketball. That those of us that love the game, like pickup games like that, with when you mix pros and college guys and like the egos and the competition, it's all there, but the respect that you get comes from what you do on the floor. Is definitely one of the most purest forms, I think, when you go and you watch those guys.
And some of that is lost because when we were in school, coaches couldn't work with you in the summer. You'd go play in the San Francisco Pro-Am or the Sacramento or the LA or the Say No Classic, which is down in Los Angeles.
That's right.
The Drew League, you would find other places, or you just go.
We'd do pickup we had in Davis. We had pickup all
guys,
summer long.
Where the guys playing at, and you go find a pickup game. That's not happening anymore because now you get 8 hours a week with your team. Everybody's taking summer school. They're doing weight training. You're practicing in the summer. So a little bit of that is lost, and I think that's huge just for development.
Yeah.
You just got to go work on your game. I want to work on my step back move. I want to work on back to the basket moves. You need to be able to just work things out, and I think some of that is being lost right now because of so much coaching that's happening.
Yeah, I would say that being in a position where you get away from coaching and you just get to let your instincts and your competitive nature kind of drive you is a different lane where I think confidence gets built, right? Because you're not worried about impressing your coach. You're not worried. Am I going to beat this guy that I'm going heads up, and this guy's talking trash, and I don't want to hear it. So, I'm going to go figure out how to win, and that might be doing things that you would not be allowed to do when your coach is there, right? That you're not, you only take this shot, or you're not, those things. So, yeah, that's interesting. Plus, that's a lot more work for you guys, right?
Right.
Continuing to work them out and put pressure. I know that for a comparison, the evolution of the game, I mean, you've been doing it now for 20 years. How much more work, and I mean, there's always work to do, but how much more work is it as a result of a lot of these changes when it comes to, not only working out the kids and developing them, which is definitely there's benefits to it, but there's got to be some challenges as far as again, these are still 17 to 22-year-old kids that have a lot of other useful things to make mistakes on. So now you're kind of on top of them all the time. Is there some challenges?
I think the NCAA does a good job of limiting the amount of time that we can be with them. In season they give you 20-hour weeks, which basically practice, extra shooting. And then in the off season, spring and summer, you get 8 hours. And I think for the most part, teams and programs are pretty good about that. And those 8 hours are 4 basketball, 4 in the weight room. So it's really just 4 hours of basketball kind of in the summer. I think as long as you balance it out, where it's not just grind, team practice, or even just 4 hours of individual, I think play some pickup. The biggest thing is coaches, this, whenever the guys are playing pickup, maybe you go into the bathroom, you just kind of peek in the gym. Those days are over because now you can actually watch because you got budgeted time. So I don't know if it's more work. I think it limits your family's vacation options.
There you go. Yeah.
And with my wife, who's also in academia, sometimes those weeks that we have don't align.
Don't match.
But no, I don't feel it's more work. Sometimes I think we can be more efficient, and we are more efficient with the technology we have, because now every single workout is filmed, every practice is filmed, and now it's so easy that as soon as practice ends, it's uploaded to our computers, uploaded to our iPads, so our guys can get feedback in real time. Which I think is huge in terms of just development and just cutting down our work time, that we're not sitting there cutting things up when it's already done for you.
Getting that information fed back to them. That, I think, that point you just made too, I think is something over the years, as a guy who finished my career and looked at things that I felt like I hit my potential on, and things that I felt like or left on the table. One of the things that I remember is I started working on some changes to the way that I shot, and a lot of one-on-one stuff my first year when I was at Fresno State with John Welch, who's a legend in that game, and he taught me so much, and so many other guys. But when the changes happened and Tarkanian retires and the new staff comes in, obviously he's gone, and so some of that stuff I was developing was not fully muscle memory, like locked in.
Sure.
And so then I was trying to kind of continue that and maintain that development, but I didn't have that information on a constant feedback. So over the course of the years, I found like there was times I was in between that, and I thought, if I had the kind of information loop feedback where I could have been seeing and evaluating it, it probably would have made it easier to make a transition or make a fundamental change. And I think about that just in terms of my own just experience and how that can affect the skill level of guys today. And I imagine, you're touching on that, like the development and the improvement in skills that you can see in some of these guys is amazing. And it's really like even what you can't see as a coach in real time, you've now got these breakdowns. So do you guys have like when like a format that you try to run when you're going skill development stuff with the guys that really takes advantage of that technology?
Yeah, you want to do things that have purpose. You want to do drills that things that they're going to work on or part of the offense. You don't want to just have them out there doing moves that they're never going to do in the game. Now, you got to do a little bit of that to keep them excited and show that hey, we're going to expand your game.
Yep.
But it's starting with the basics, and you don't want to skip steps. So we film every workout. We'll as we build the next morning or the next day, whenever we get together, we'll probably watch that film, and we'll point those things out. Hey, these are the few things that we're talking about here, the teaching points. See what you did here. We're going to improve on this. And it's just building blocks that you keep building, because you don't want to jump out the gates week 1 of the summer when it's an 8-week summer and just throw all the stuff at them that makes no sense to them. You want to build up, so then they have their little summer break, and they come back in the fall. It's go time.
Yeah, the simple, like one step at a time kind of mentality of everything in life is key, especially in sports. Like the AAU kind of culture over the years and the highlight reels and all of that, at the end of the day, it is, like you said, it's fundamentals. It's what footwork, balance, being able to get to the same shot over and over. When you hear guys like, I always love listening to guys like Kobe and Michael Jordan, all the greats, the legends that talk about the simplicity with which their mind works in some ways, and obviously it's complex, high-level thinking, but it's like simplistically, I'm getting to that same jump shot in the same spot. Now I might get there 15 different ways, but at the end of the day, it's still that same jump shot that I'm shooting in the gym 1,000 times. And that knowledge and imparting that on kids so that they will stay focused on that one jump shot and get fundamentally sound is kind of counterintuitive to the highlight generation that sees nothing but the makes on
That's
YouTube.
why the filming of the workouts actually is good, because many reasons. One, there may be 1 or 2 things that the kid may want to post on his social media.
For sure.
But kids want to see themselves. And I think that constant, that instant feedback helps to kind of this instant gratification generation that we're in. Even if it might not be a win per se, it's still that instant feedback, instant response.
Without a doubt. I think being able to see and recognize if what you felt looks the way that you think it felt, right, or how you think it looked, and then to look back and see, that didn't look anything like the way that it felt.
I remember when I was at Davis my freshman year, we ran North Carolina B1 action, the box set with the diagonal screen to a pin down, and the coaches kept getting on me about the angle of the screen I was setting, and I swear it felt like I was setting at the right angle. And we had to repeat like 3 or 4 times because either I was letting the guy through, I wasn't, whatever it was, but we didn't have the film capabilities. So I just had to take their word for it. Had I seen it, I might have been able to correct it sooner than I did. But yeah, sometimes coaches say this, but you think you're doing it right, and then you see the film like, oh, okay, now it makes sense.
Well, and that's a part of like, dynamic obviously as being a coach is that doesn't always mean a guy's not listening to you. But at the end of the day, you're trusting your eyes and your instinct and your body, and you have to be able to trust those things to be able to be successful.
And people learn differently.
Absolutely.
Not everybody can just hear it and do it right away. Sometimes they got to see it. Sometimes they got to go on the whiteboard and they got to diagram it. Whatever way your player learns, you got to learn that quickly. And sometimes that is the benefit of the summer, because you can learn those things and learn, guys that you brought in for the first time. Well, how do they respond to coaching? How do they learn? And you figure those things out. So when the season starts in September, you're ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, you're pushing those unique dynamics, and I think the big thing with all leaders, right, is you have to have a vision. You have to have this a unifying direction that you're all pursuing, and that's creating that is obviously a big part of that authority and that leadership role. But you can't bypass the step of like, you got to understand each person, and you got to figure out what makes them tick, and you got to figure out how to get the best out of them to create that. And I think when we all look at leaders that were the most affected by, coaches that have made the biggest impact on us, right, it's almost always one, first off they invest in us, so and we know they care about us, so we feel like we're working to validate their belief, but we also know like they figured out and cared about how I worked. Like they didn't always ask me to just follow what they were saying.
Sure.
They were trying to help me figure out how to get the most out of myself. When you kind of look at now being almost 2 decades and coming up, and you've been around a lot of coaches and a lot of players, one of the things that we all benefit from when we're around other leaders is learning things that we really identify with, that were great, right? Things that really affected us as players, things that we see as an assistant on the staff that we're like, man, that's a great approach, or yeah, I wouldn't do that. Have there been any lessons like from your time at Pomona and then at Santa Clara and Stanford where you've had, like, I'm sure there's plenty, but any really iconic big ones for you, were like, this is a moment where I sat and I realized like this is going to change my approach going forward?
As you look back at all those experiences, the best leadership models, the best coaching is when they led with honesty. As hard as it may be sometimes, as players, to hear the truth, it's the best approach. And all the guys that I've worked for in one way or another have been extremely honest, with players, and it's the best way. And from a recruiting standpoint, in the recruiting process as well, just being honest and not promising guys stuff, I think is the best route. When I was at Stanford, we were really fortunate in terms of our ability to recruit some really high-profile kids, and they were being told everything from every school in the country, and Coach Hass was just brutally honest with all these guys. You're gonna come here, I'm gonna treat you like a man, I'm gonna treat you, give you a lot of responsibility, I'm not gonna babysit you, and you're gonna have an opportunity to come in and work. And that was refreshing for a lot of these kids, because they were hearing other stuff from other programs. And we were able to sign 3 McDonald's All-Americans when we were at Stanford because of, I think, that honest approach in terms of how he built that relationship. So when they got to campus, it remained that way. It wasn't like you told them one thing in the recruiting process and then coached them a different way.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that goes to the point, there's a lot of conversations around this that I hear, and when it comes to kids and what they want today, like I see people sometimes, I think, that quote negatively talk about today's generation, the old man on the porch conversation.
Get off my grass.
Yeah, like that. I mean, every generation has its changes, but I do think that the fundamental desire to be coached, to be pushed, kids all still have that. I think we all innately have that. And while there was different approaches and different aspects as far as how they were raised in terms of the cell phone era, et cetera, but they want to be coached. But the thing that I personally attribute where that is kind of misrepresented is they don't want to be coached by a guy that doesn't care about him. They don't want to be coached by a guy, and like you said, if you're being honest with me about maybe what I did or didn't do right, But at the same time, I'm like, you don't care about me, and I don't, even if you might be right, like, you don't have my best interest.
Right.
So I'm more likely to shut you out and be like, I don't really want to hear it. But if it's someone that I know cares about me and is trying to help me succeed and is pushing me for the right reasons, give me that information. Like, I want it. And that component is one of the things where, you can coach, but you can't skip that step of the relationships.
Sure.
And so I would imagine, like you said, for kids that are being promised those things, like, they're drawn to the idea, oh, you're going to challenge me. Like, ultimately, if my goal is to go play professionally or to be the best player I can be or play in the NBA, I'm not going to get that from a coach that's just going to tell me everything I want to hear and not get me better. Because if I was ready for the NBA, I'd be going there right now.
No question. And, this is very cliche, but they don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And to be able to show that, you got to have some skin in the game. You got to build some sweat equity. You got to get on the floor, and you got to be on the floor with them. To me, of my 19 years in college basketball, that's the only way to really build that rapport and that trust with your players, is to get on the floor and sweat with them, work out, be present. If you have accolades, that's great. Maybe initially, if you were a great player, this and that, they're attracted to that. But once that happens, once they're there, until you, like you said, build that relationship, they're really not going to care. So you got to be present. You got to sweat with them. You got to be on the floor. You got to be in the workouts. When the team's in the weight room, you got to go in the weight room and do some of the stuff. Even if they see you fail, it's okay. Coach was in there. Coach was there with us. He was in the locker room. He was in the weight room with us.
Something to laugh about and bond over, right?
And it's not being buddy. Yeah. It's just being present, so they can trust that, hey, he's not just telling us to do the work. He's doing the work with us, and we're all in this together.
And I think that's, being human and being approachable is a big part of it too, because at the end of the day, when you're challenging a kid or you're challenging anybody as a leader, you're confronting things, and you're forcing them to, another cliche saying, right, to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that consistent state, like, the more that they, can see and understand that the motivation that you have is, one, for the best interest, but two, like, you're also real. Like, you're a real person, and you're not coming off like, I'm telling you how to do this, and I'm not really credible because I'm showing you that I'm not really involved in it in a way where I speak from a place of expertise, right? Like, when you're on the floor with them, and even like the accolades, to your point, I think guys that have accolades and think that's going to get them somewhere, it actually might draw some attention. But really, if you have accolades and then you also invest, then obviously that's powerful, because it means more to a kid. And if you've been in the game longer, you've coached kids that have been successful, you value that. Like, that's, to me, when I look at the guys, I valued that they put time into me.
Sure. Because
they had such an impressive resume, and so that was a validating thing for any player. So yeah, I think that's a key point. And I also think that's one of the things that some of the shifts with the changes, like the portal and NIL and some of that authority, I think that's the best part of the changes, is that kids aren't really forced to maybe stay in environments where coaches aren't giving them that. And I think we can probably reference points in our career, like when we played, transferring was like a penalty. Like, you dealt with a big part of how I ended up at Davis was to avoid sitting out a year, right, along with other pieces. But a lot of guys played for coaches that didn't care about them. Once they got there, they kind of took advantage of the fact that kid was kind of stuck in the system, didn't spend any time getting to know him, and the way the college basketball rules were set up challenged the players to kind of overcome that, as opposed to finding the right fit. So I think that, to me, is a good byproduct. Do you feel like as a general effect that most of the coaching ranks have kind of been forced to adjust to that now, in order to kind of recognize the fact that the authority levels and that power dynamic has shifted? Yeah,
I don't think we live in this authoritarian dynamic anymore. It's more relationship based. It's more, like you said, it's just that care factor. Do it because I said, has its place, but it's not the only way to do things now. A lot of kids, especially places I've worked at, they want to know the why. Why is this the best way to do it? Why? And you better be able to demonstrate that. And that has nothing to do with your accolades. That's your ability to slow down, be able to focus on process, be able to teach the game. All those things matter. So I do think there has been a shift. I think it's for the better. Because again, I think today's generation deals with a lot more than our generation had to. Everything going on in your teammate's life because of social media, because of this. We didn't know. Like I had to ask you about your parents or your girlfriend, or you actually had to sit down and like ask and learn about somebody. Where now you just scroll. You know what they did during summer break.
That's right. It's a totally different world, and the the dynamic that I think kind of gets formed of being able to be human, right, is also where I think a coach can make an even, maybe not a greater impact, but make an impact relative to today's environment, because the perception of what people obviously present on social media, right, it's all the highlights, it's all the positive things. No one is out there, I shouldn't say no one, but most people aren't out there advertising their failures, or you don't see highlight reels with the guys shooting 100 shots and missing 62 of them. You see the 38 they made. And part of the role as a coach, right, is teaching kids how to fail, how to understand the balance of the process, and do it because I said so comes from a baseline of, if I tell you to do it because I said so, it's because I don't have time to explain it, but I've proven to you that you can trust that I'm doing this for the right reasons.
Sure.
If you never take that step, then eventually they do it because I said so, no one wants to hear it. Right?
So true. So true. So speaking about learning how to fail, go back to what we talked about earlier about playing pickup. The fact that guys don't play pickup anymore, like when you show up to a gym and there's 20 people in there, 15 people in there, and you lose, you might sit for 30 minutes.
If you ever get back on.
Or you might not get back on. Like, yes, you want to work on parts of your game. It's also like, no, we need to win so we keep playing. Otherwise, we're playing twos on the side basket.
That's right. and that goes to the parts of like the little parts of the game that are so big, right? Of like setting a screen, grabbing a rebound, securing a defensive stop, like all those things that are such a part of winning a game. But when you start talking like, I want to work on my ball handling and shooting from this corner, that's not necessary. That's not going to be the thing that wins you the game.
No.
Like, it's how do you compete? Like,
right.
Figure out instinctively, I'm evaluating what's going on the floor, and I know what the objective is. It's to get a stop, is to score, and I need to affect this play in a positive way.
That's what I'm going to be watching here for the next 3 days, is how do you affect the game? Because a lot of these guys, because of now having trainers, I watch their stuff on social media. A lot of it's really good, really impressive, and they're doing moves, and they look like their favorite NBA players, and then you go and watch them with their teams, they're not doing that. They're not affecting winning. So it's almost like, well, there's got to be a balance somewhere. There's a need for both. There's got to be a balance. And, that a lot of kids think you got to score. Like, no. You can affect the game by playing great defense. Drew Holiday. You can affect the game by rebounding. You can affect the game by being a great passer, scoring, shooting the ball when it's the right time to shoot, and passing the ball when it's the right time to pass.
Absolutely. Well, and one-on-one is great. Skill set is great. You need that in order to be able to execute. But, there isn't a way to replicate understanding not just the guy that's guarding you, but the help side defense. Where are the defenders at? I mean, all the great players, would, university would say they're not actually looking at the defender that's guarding them. They're looking at the three guys 100%. That are in the help position behind them, and they're determining what they're going to do to the guy guarding them based on where the help is. That guy's just in the way, and you can't simulate that in just one-on-one skill work. You can simulate getting to spots, and a lot of that is the part of the game where you just have to play. Like, you have to develop that so that your eyes can translate it, and that it's also the part that kind of builds that. Like, it's very difficult to get the kind of competitive reaction when you're doing a one-on-one skill shooting, or you can challenge yourself to do reps, but it's not the same thing as we're about to be kicked off the court and I'm going to have to watch games for 35 minutes and someone's going to let me know about it for those 35 minutes that we lost.
No doubt.
To give you a different level of motivation and competitive spirit.
No, 100%.
Yeah, that part of the game, for me, when I look at like things that I miss, right, I miss those, miss the locker room. And I know, as a coach, like that's got to be one of the fun parts, right, is we're 40 years old now and we are long removed from our glory days of playing, but being around kids and in that locker room and being able to kind of build that, is that one of your favorite parts of the job? Is if you kind of look at coaching and you were to pull yourself out of it, what would you miss most about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. The road trips, being in the airport, being on a bus, having conversations, because I feel like today's kids, maybe more than we were, are well versed on so many things. Because they have it all at their fingertips, so they can have conversations. Yeah, they can have the GOAT conversation. Who's the best? We that's universal.
Gotta
have the GOAT conversation. But outside of that, they could talk on politics. They can talk about stocks. Everybody has a Robinhood account, so guys are trading stocks on their phone. We weren't trading stocks. At least I wasn't trading stocks as a 19-year-old. So it's those parts of it. And then Friday night, before a Saturday game, we watch film, and then the guys are just hanging out in the film room on the road, just talking and joking and getting rehab, and those things as a coach and as a player, but now as a coach are so enjoyable. And then whenever we do like just team building exercises, where we really get to know guys. The last few years I've been part of some special things that we've done, and we call it bio night, where everybody does a biography, does a report on each other. I believe video, all these little things that we would do to really get to know each other, and it gets emotional, man. When you can get emotional learning about your teammate and your coaching staff, and guys are vulnerable, and you can still wrap your arms around guys and say I love you, and then go out to battle the next night. Like, if I ever step away from this coaching world, those are the things that I'm gonna miss.
Yeah, that to me, when you say that, like I can totally relate. I mean, it's going back to everyone that you've played with, coached with, that you've coached. You don't sit and dwell on the fact, man, I wish we were back on the floor, going through practice again. But you remember like those conversations and those moments. You definitely, even like big wins where you celebrate, but it's usually what you guys do after the win to celebrate and have those team bonding moments that really cement those relationships and are what you immediately recall when you see somebody after 5 years. I think that's one of the coolest things, right? You coach a kid now, even that. I'm sure if you came across some of the kids that you were coaching in your first few years, like that same feeling and that reaction still is there. And I think that's one of the special things about sports as a whole, that anyone who hasn't experienced that, like there's a big thing they're missing out on, because it's such a like pure form of building a relationship with somebody.
And every year too, there's always like at least one practice that everybody recalls, and it could be for many reasons. One, it was super competitive, maybe the coach was pissed off, but there's always a practice. And when I was at Santa Clara, we had one, and it was referred to as the MIDI practice. So something was going on in our gym, so we had to go to Archbishop MIDI in San Jose to practice that day. And Coach Keating said, all right, we're going to play first team versus second team, and whoever wins is starting the next game. And it was the most competitive practice you can imagine. That second group, I mean, they found another gear, they found another level. And whenever I see those guys, and that was 14 years ago, and whenever I run into those guys, we always reference the MIDI practice.
MIDI practice. Yeah, that's the kind of moment where everyone is aligned in a purpose, right? And usually, I was talking about this with Rob Easton the other day, like the shared adversity, right? Like the moments where you're in it together, it's a challenge, and that everybody's different, right? So everybody's got a different initial reaction to it, and you start to see the bonds of a team start to form, where there are guys that are going to deal with everything adverse with humor. There are guys that are going to get super focused. There are guys that might get quiet, and like everybody, and you just see this evolve, and that shared adversity creates like a memory for everybody.
For sure.
Especially when you overcome that adversity and you look at it like, man, that was like something that no one can really.
There's nothing better.
Yeah, they can't be in that moment with you unless they were there and a part of that. Yeah, that's really cool. And to be able to do that, I think, as a coach, right? Like, do you guys have conversations as a staff, as players, where you're like, essentially, whether it be because things are in a lull, maybe guys have gotten complacent, which is human nature, or something's going on where you're like, we need to do something to kind of create that environment today?
Oh yeah. Well, we got a whole bag of tricks. You can pick on the best player, and if the best player can handle it, then you've got something good. You can pick on a freshman, and maybe not say pick on, but give them adverse situations.
Put them in a tough spot.
We try to create adversity days, and just little things. Maybe they won't get a call today. Maybe every 50-50 call goes the other way, just to see how they handle. Can they have that next play, next focus mentality? And then it's not just, hey, let's leave it at that. Let's go run baselines and then we're done. No. We'll talk about it now.
Teaching moment.
Come back the next day. Show them the film. Maybe you don't tell them right away what you were doing, but maybe a week, 2 weeks, end of the season, then you kind of let in, hey, this is why we did this, just to kind of see. But as coaches, you're always trying to push buttons. You always, like you said earlier, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And the more you can do that in the preseason, the better they're going to be once conference play hits.
Exactly right, and being able to go back and help them understand why you did those things that's a part of building trust too. Like, the not giving a guy a call, that go to that I've.
But that could work. That could work against you now too, because every practice is filmed. So now at the end of practice, the players like, hey coach, pull up that charge call.
Yeah. Oh, they'll get you.
And they'll get.
but you can teach them like, I did it, and so like at the game of basketball, guess what?
Road game.
We're gonna get plenty of calls against us. So. Was your reaction to sit and argue and complain, or was it to get pissed and come back and be that like another level higher in your competitive response to overcome it, to essentially channel that into a productive outcome? And the truth is, even the best of competitors sometimes loses it and gets outside of their their wheelhouse and kind of their centered up best competitive state. And so cool, I put you in a spot, you got out of it. So now you felt that experience where you let yourself get distracted, or you let yourself get pulled into adversity. And over here, you look at how you channeled it and look at the success you had. So now you've got a place to reference when you're on the road and something goes south and an official calls a block when it should have been a charge, or vice versa. And if they start going on, you've got something to actually draw upon, right? But if you don't create that, now you're learning on the fly. That's obviously one of the things I think makes it hard when you bring kids in that are new and you haven't done that. Freshmen used to be the example, but now when you're bringing a new team in every year, you're kind of figuring that out with that player that's playing
for sure
at that level. So you almost have to probably create more of them in the preseason.
No doubt. It's all a process. It's all a process, and it's all about building and teaching.
That's one of the most like notable things to me that I would think is when you have a new roster and you are trying to figure out all these things, and you don't have the benefit of 6, 7, 8 players. I know that was a challenge during time at Davis, right? Is that we ended up having a lot of like new teams and new guys, and figuring that out can be very much a learning curve. So when you guys kind of adapt to this right now, are there any like challenges that you think kind of carry a little bit further over into the playing season as a result of more turnover in the college basketball levels and at the schools that you've been at and the programs you've coached? Would you say you guys have had more turnover, less turnover than kind of the collective college experience?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I was at Santa Clara, we coached some players that some really good players that end up doing 50 years with us. Had that been today, there's no chance those guys would have done a 5th year with us. they would have gone to the Power 5 and got paid and did that. So we were lucky that era was not the NIL free transfer era. Get to Stanford in 2016, and everybody says, well, nobody would ever transfer from Stanford. How could you leave a Stanford degree on the table? Well, that was the case for the first 3 years, and then here comes this transfer era, where the things starting to change. And we did see some undergraduate players transfer for many reasons and to leave. NIL became a factor the last 2 years. So, the first year we were like, hey, we're not doing anything. And then, there was a collective. They started, being active in that space. And, for the guys who left, it was for sure a factor. Not the factor, but it was a factor.
A factor.
Yeah.
Well, and it's hard to argue when you look at kind of the balance of the way it is. It's hard to argue against anybody capitalizing on the opportunity to earn money, right? I mean, any other 18-year-old kid that gets a job can get paid. And so when you take athletes, there was a lot of flaws in the college system. I mean, I definitely can remember some of my teammates, our teammates, that from a financial perspective, the limitations that they had on what they could do and the financial situation, it was just unrealistic to expect kids to not look for solutions. And and obviously the universities make so much money, on these things collectively, especially the big programs. So yeah, I think it's great that they have an opportunity to make money, but like I joke about this a lot too. At the same time, I don't know about you, but I was not mature enough to have business conversations about making money when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. I had all sorts of other things on my mind, and I considered myself reasonably responsible as a kid. So I have to imagine that is a challenge.
I would have wanted access to haircuts, free meals downtown Davis, and maybe transportation, maybe access to a car. Like those would have been like 3 things that, like, if I could check those 3 things, I would have been a happy camper. If you would have gave me $50,000, $80,000, $100,000 as a 19-year-old kid, forget about it.
I would have done a lot of dumb things with it.
Right?
I mean, that when we were playing too, that was when Party Poker came out. So
my gosh.
I probably would have blown on Party Poker.
100%.
It's just irresponsible. But that's whatever that is for this generation, right? They're getting money. I know that, like, the parents and, like you said, handlers and different people that are involved in it. And I think because it's so new, obviously there's still so much to be resolved, and I see lots of business,
You could buy a home right now. Think about that. You could have equity. You could own property by the time you graduate college. Like, never before has that been possible for a college student athlete to be able to do.
Yep.
So if these kids are smart, they should be. You put it into annuities. Like, there's a lot of ways that you could invest this money and grow it, where you have a wonderful starting point for the rest of your life. Where most of us are grind once we finish college. Now you have $500,000 in your bank account. Like, that's a game changer.
That goes to, like, how much we were told, and we tell how, like, the small micro percentage of people that make it to the NBA, right? And even from there, a small percentage that play professionally and make the kind of money that they can go, this was my career, and so it's the message. We all know it's a small percentage. Why would you not, when you are probably at your peak economic value as a person at 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, not capitalize on that when that opportunity? Like, that's why I think, like, the software, the software.com boom and all these, like, college kids that made gazillions of dollars when they were loaded up on Red Bull and energy and alcohol and made their money.
Yeah.
The same thing for athletes. So it's hard to argue that it's somehow bad. I hear people talk about it as like a negative. I'm like, I totally disagree. It's just one of those things that it's also, there's a lot of risks when you put kids at that age. So the hope is that there's obviously good coaches and good people around them, and then obviously families. But same thing goes, especially when you're talking about kids that maybe aren't going to make it to the NBA and come from a lower economic background, to potentially just through college be able to help their family. Like all those things, I think are fantastic.
Pay your parents' mortgage, pay off their 30-year loan, as a 20-year-old kid. I mean, what an amazing gift that would be to your family, which you could do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that sets the foundation for them to then, when they do finish, they're in a better position to go pursue whatever their next venture is, right? Without being restricted, including going and getting a graduate degree, right? If that's what they want to do, right? They how about going and paying for your own graduate degree because you financed it through what you did in in college. So yeah, I think those are all really, really cool things. So, kind of shifting off that topic and just talking the game. I mean, you are, obviously somebody who's been in programs that the West Coast Conference with Santa Clara, the former Pac-12, whatever that is, which still I can't believe that.
Sad, just sad.
It very much sad. And now back into the Big West where Davis was and is. In your experience, like kind of measuring the competition and the mindsets, obviously there's some differences in the types of kids and different quote unquote recruited or talent levels that always exist from like a Pomona up to, but there's some common threads. So throughout your years, is there anything that you've found is the most common like identifier for kids that have success or that ultimately become max out their ability and have good, productive, successful careers at any of the programs and any of the conferences?
Sure. Organization. These kids, for the most part, understand time management. Their lives are balanced, outside of basketball, so they can spend more time to focus on basketball. Their social lives are intact, their academics are intact, so they can, spend more time in the gym. When those things are messed up, it's hard to be able to compartmentalize and just focus on the basketball part. So that's been a commonality amongst all the places, that I've worked at. The differences at the Pac-12 level or Power 5 level, it really just comes down to length. That's it. If you look at the 2024 NBA draft, Colorado, Tristan Da Silva, Cody Williams. You look at the guys, Bronny and the other guard from USC that were drafted. These guys are 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", but they have like plus 5 inches on the wingspan. That's the difference from Power 5 to these other conferences, is just that length at every position, from point guards to centers. It's really the only difference in terms of foot speed, in terms of shooting ability, just ability to make decisions. It's all very similar, but the bodies are just a little different at that Power 5 level.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think that's the lesson that so many coaches obviously try to impart on kids, right? Like, wherever your ceiling is, inevitably you're gonna hit it before you actually recognize it, right? Like it's not something that my ceiling is gonna be here. Like, you play until all of a sudden you realize, like, I think tapped out based on the fact that I can't succeed anymore. And so it's a pretty harsh reality when that comes. But the ceiling that we all have as players, like the physical stuff, we can't change.
Can't change it,
right? And so at whatever that ceiling level is, the thing that's going to differentiate you is all the details and all the fundamentals and all the understanding of the game. And that translates to them for the rest of their lives, whatever their profession is. Like, you have to be about the details to differentiate yourself when all things are equal.
100%.
And there's plenty of guys that we see that play at those big conferences that they stand out for the opposite reason of the 7'2" guy, because they don't have that. And you're like, how are they competing? It's because they have excelled in all those little details and all the fundamentals, and they have maxed out their ability to compete at that level. I know, like, that piece is sometimes hard to get through when you are at those bigger conferences and they've gotten by on talent for so long, and they haven't been forced to deal with the fact that your talent isn't going to beat that guy anymore. For some guys, they don't have to do it till they get to the NBA.
Right.
And other guys, it's in college. But the idea that I'm trying to teach you this for whenever you hit your ceiling. So whenever you get there, you need these things. And having kids understand that, that's probably one of to me the biggest challenges of reaching those those uber talented kids is that don't already have that instinctively. And I think part of that is the love of the game, which when I listen to you talk and I listen to coaches today talk, I firmly believe that there's an improvement in fostering the love of the game and really pushing that a little bit more than in some of the generations past with coaching, where I think the extreme of it being adverse all the time and kind of almost trying to strip guys of loving the game. Maybe not trying, but kind of that being the byproduct.
Sure.
Because I think there has to be a balance, right? You need to challenge kids, you need to push them, but at the end of the day, they're still out there playing a game they should love, and you have to create that reward for them. So like when you guys, using that kind of particular topic, when you guys go through the seasons and you do have a couple tough losses, or you maybe have some kids that look like they're breaking down, do you have some things that you like to lean on to kind of remind them that, hey, we're playing a game, like let's have fun, like some of that stuff to lighten the space that either you've seen done or that you like to do?
Yeah, number one, you got to get them away from that space, like that actual physical space. So don't have meetings in the gym, don't have a meeting in your office, because right now those two places are kind of bringing them a little anxiety,
a little negativity.
Go for a walk on campus. Go ask them, hey, what's your favorite spot to eat on campus? Let's go grab a bite lunch on me, and just change the scenery a little bit, and just get them talking in a different way, maybe seeing you in a different light, and just getting them to open up a little bit more, and then bringing it back to what's important. Keep the main thing, and not focus on any of the outside noise, or even if you're going through a little bit of a tough time. But I think just change up the scenery and get them away from what's causing them that anxiety has always been pretty positive.
I think that's a great point and a great idea, because it's really natural for I'll reference a particular type of player. Like some guys naturally have an ability, like when they're not playing, they're off. Like they could play bad, they could play good. You don't know the difference in their personality. And those that are really intense and really overly analytical, right? Their performance will directly affect their how they see the rest of the world. And in general, the athlete's mentality is to be hyper focused, like tunnel vision. All I see is this goal. That's part of being great at something, and that can work against you when especially as a young kid, when all you deal with as a coach and it's how did you practice today, how did you play, and the results aren't the same, and you kind of forget you're still a human being with a lot of other skills. You still have an entire rest of your life around you. So I think that's a great way to kind of get kids to get away from the fact that this isn't the only thing in your life. It's an important thing.
Yeah.
But if it's now counterproductive, we need you to go get a little balance. That's awesome. And have you at times, as an assistant, right, there's obviously different roles, and I'd love to kind of hear your take on how you take kind of your role with the players and being a different type of relationship for them versus the head coach, and your role as it relates to the head coach of that program and who you're working for, and kind of that dynamic, which I think is a unique thing in coaching that relates to most careers, which is you have a boss and you are an authority figure or a so to speak boss. So you're juggling managing what you're being not told, but you're following the direction and lead of someone above you, and trying to impart that. And so I always find I'm at my best when I have kind of that combo. I'd love to hear kind of.
Well, number one, you have to be loyal to your head coach. Period. It's one voice. It's one message. That message cannot deviate. So I think that's a trust that you build as a staff that can never deviate. The thing that we have that the head coach might not have is time. So we may have more time for the player to be able to explain themselves, to be able to even vent, where he might not be able to vent to the head coach from a timing standpoint. Maybe he's not comfortable just completely being vulnerable and opening up where he might be with the assistant coach. So you got to be that sounding board. And sometimes as assistants, you got to be able to just take it in terms of allowing them that space to be able to vent and express themselves and hear them out, and then bring it back to this is the message. Sometimes you may need to interpret it a little differently for them to really grasp it, really understand it. But so that's the role as the assistant coach. But by no means do you ever deviate from what the message is.
Absolutely. Well, that's I look at my professional career, and I joke a lot of times. I feel like some days I'll go home and I feel like all I did was argue, because I'll be on the phone with someone listening to them vent and essentially be presenting the other side of the equation, trying to help them see a different perspective for their own good, right? So that
Sure.
they can then have a slightly less emotional response, and then get on the phone, have the same conversation with the other side of the equation, and do the same thing. So I'm basically arguing for both sides, but the goal is to then be able to bring them back to a place where they can be at their best in a situation that you're not there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as an assistant, right, to help that kid first off figure out what it is that he's really experiencing and try to grasp it yourself, and then help them comprehend and make sense of it, and then try to point them in the direction of what to do with it.
Right.
And I would think at the same time probably being a like an ear to the ground for the head coach about the things that he may not be aware of, or that you said that they are not going to say to the head coach, because there is it's just a different relationship there. And so when you get into that space, you really have to create that two-way conversation. That I would imagine that's also created some pretty strong bonds with some of the players from recruiting them and then taking them through. Have you found in your career how many guys that have gone through and been players in your programs that have then gone into coaching as a result of kind of being in that environment where they get to kind of really live through those relationships that oftentimes kids in college that don't play sports don't have that, because they're not in that kind of environment? Yeah,
it's really exciting to be able to see guys. And it's funny because you ask them when they gone from player to then being in those rooms, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't know you guys really talk like that in those rooms, and not bad, but like
the real conversations,
that level of conversations are actually going on in these conference rooms. So they were shocked, and then like kind of like you have with a parent, with a father-son relationship. You're like, oh, okay, now I get why you did this when I was young. Now I get why you said these things in these lessons. So it's kind of fun when you kind of get to that point where you guys are now peers after it was that different relationship, and you kind of share those stories. It's really sweet.
Yeah, that is cool. I remember just talking about this with working for Clink at Chico State, and we'd have our coaches meetings, and it was he's such a positive leader, right, as an example. And that coaches meeting, though, we're having a very honest conversation about what a guy's up to, right? And so we're getting real about where we stand on what they're doing, trying to really assess. And certainly, yeah, if it's a closed door meeting for a reason, because you're really coming to a consensus as a group. And I was always so impressed as we would have those, because I would walk out sometimes and I would want to be more, really challenge a guy and be more aggressive in that if I didn't think they were vested enough or working hard enough. I was always impressed by the way that he had a very measured and controlled and hyper positive response, and at times thinking maybe that wasn't enough, and then watching the guys respond and play better and do exactly what we wanted them to do. And so it took a lot of like my experience of being with coaches that usually were pretty hard on me, and realized that he was able to get so much out of them by being positive in his approach, right, and really taking the time to deliver it in a way that wasn't a threatening message or a fear-based tactic, right? And
it's consistency.
Yep.
And as coaches, you have to be true to who you are. You can't try to be somebody else. You can't, I really was enamored, I really enjoyed and studied this coach when I was, younger, and now I got to act like
Yeah.
him. No. You got to be true to who you are, but also once you kind of find your way, then you got to be consistent. And I think players and teams really value that consistency.
Without a doubt. Like, so when you compare, like if you were to compare the head coaches that you've worked with, every leader's different, every personality. What would would there be a couple things that you say you brought with you into your coaching career from each of those coaches, and things that I won't put you on the spot to say things you won't do, so it doesn't always help, but things that you took and kind of built into, like, I that resonates with me, and I want to deliver that.
I'm gonna go outside the box a little bit. The best leader I've ever been around was my campus rec director at UC Davis, Laura Hall. So so when I stopped playing basketball, I dove both feet in to campus recreation and intramurals, and I helped her, and she was an unbelievable leader. And one of the hardest things I think for young people is to hold their peers accountable. When you're 20 years old, to be able to hold your roommate, to be able to hold your buddy, your teammate accountable, that's a hard thing to do. And in that space of campus rec, she had us do that all the time. If it's training referees, or if it's having to be conflict mediators. So we had to do that, and we had to teach how to do that. So I've always brought that to my teams, where it's one thing when a coach says something, but when a player says something to another player, that's when it resonates. And teaching usually some of the older guys, but teaching them how to communicate with teammates, how to be constructive. One exercise we've done, and we had the assistance of our sports psychologist last year, is you get in a circle, and you have to say 3 constructive things about the guy, one of your teammates, in front of everybody. Like, sounds like a simple exercise. It's so really hard to do.
Yeah.
And everybody in that circle knows if you're BSing or not. And then, and then not just a one-time thing, then maybe the next day or next week you come back and different guys are doing this. But teaching the guys how to give constructive feedback, but also how to receive it and not take it personal, and hear it, and then, perform better. So I've always kind of taken that as a skill, that when our players leave our program, they have that ability to have hard, tough conversations with loved ones or with peers, because again, it's not an easy thing to do.
That's a great one. I want to dive into that more, because that goes to the idea that, like, leadership is something that we're all a work in progress, no matter how much, but it's a learned skill. There are innate things that you can naturally have as a leader, but the understanding of how to lead multiple personalities and multiple types of people is a skill that, like, really you're tasked with when you're in a leadership position, is to create other leaders. So, and that's a great way to challenge guys, because that is an incredibly hard thing to do. Being willing to construct. I mean, most guy coaches, you just kind of shame each other by making fun of each other, and that's how you get your point across, right? And it's all jokes and fun, which is why most of us have nicknames from 10 places. But to be able to teach how to do it constructively in a way that makes it difficult to blow off as jokes. Yeah, that's great. I would imagine that highlights the different types of leadership that you see. I've spent a lot of time, kind of evaluating that. There are various forms of leadership, right? I mean, talk about guys that lead just by example, the quieter types that just watch what they do, and you're essentially, seeing that. You've got the kind of emotional, vocal leaders, and then you've got those that are, the ones that are going to challenge other people, and that different type of personality. There's a place for all of them, but I would love to hear kind of your take on, the different types of leaders that you see, and how you kind of work to help bring the best out of those leaders, because there's always a lot of fun in helping guys figure out their voice as a leader.
There's especially for players, there's the lead by doing guys, and I don't even consider that leadership. I think I just do your job. I don't necessarily see that as leadership. Now maybe you're setting a good example, but teaching these guys how to communicate is really important. And it's easy when we're sitting down in a locker room. There's no, your heart rate's not up. But how do you do it in the heat of the battle? How do you do it when you're in a tough situation? How do you communicate with somebody when you're in practice and you're losing the competition and it's this guy's fault? Like what are some things you can do? And so a lot of times with leadership, especially in team situations, some of the stuff is nonverbal. Some of the things are a pat on the back. Sometimes it's putting an arm around somebody. Sometimes it's yelling at somebody, but then the next possession, then you go whisper in their ear. It's just finding those ways to positively affect people and positively create change. Another part about leadership is you got to make sure your side of the street's clean. You can't try to hold people accountable or try to get people to move in the same direction if your side of the street over here is messy. So making sure that you have your stuff in order, so then your word actually does mean something.
So so well put, because that first step for guys to really be able to lead is to get to a place where, one, the example that they're setting allows them to be a credible voice, right? I mean, if you are speaking about things that you don't do or you aren't an example of, the credibility amongst the team is going to be non-existent, right? And then there's also the ability, I think, awareness and being able to step outside of yourself to observe what's actually going on, to this point of understanding whether I need to yell at that guy because he responds by getting pissed off and upping his level of competition, and that's the way to reach that person, or I need to go give that guy a pat on the back and I need to put my arm around, like, come on, man, we need you. Like, you have to be at a place where you are settled in yourself so you can observe. And I think when you watch guys that aren't there yet, they will generally express it in the way that they have either been expressed to or the only way they know, and you'll see adverse reactions because they'll do the wrong thing to the wrong guy, and so that evolution of getting them to a place where, all right, in order for you to do that, you have to be on par with all of your stuff. Like,
and you got to coach them. In the moment when you see a leadership moment in practice, good or bad, you gotta comment on it, and if it was bad, hey, coach them up. Hey, you remember in practice when you said this? Maybe you can try next time. Try saying it this way. Because I saw the way that he received it, and it wasn't the way you were hoping that he would receive it. So it's just constantly coaching. Some people call those the soft skills.
Yep.
It's constantly coaching those the same way you would, with the hard skills and basketball stuff.
Yeah, that's a great part of the game, and something that as a coach and doing over the years, like that's an impact that you've been making on guys, your entire career, right?
Yeah.
And those little things translate into their lives, and so much of what now as someone who's been in the professional world, like, it's those lessons that you take and maybe don't even understand fully while you're playing, right? But they then translate to how do you apply every situation that you're faced with that doesn't maybe look familiar, and you're going to equate it to some analogy of that environment because you've been put in so many of those adverse situations or learning situations, and that's the impact that you're having as a coach.
For sure.
Dude, appreciate you coming by. I know you got some scouting and some recruiting to do, so really appreciate you taking the time, man. It's good to see you. It's been forever, and we'll definitely have to have you back again here and talk some more, man.
This is awesome, man. Congrats to all your success, and thanks for having me today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess, dude. Take care, bud.
Appreciate it, man.